People of Reddit, what are your night shift horror stories? Not mine, but I used to work at a small hotel and the manager there told me a terrifying night shift story. It was about midnight when she got a call at the front desk from a man. He said that he's with his 8-year-old daughter who dances competitively and needed advice on what she should wear. She gave him some basic fashion advice. He asked my manager, what about fishnet leggings? Do you think those are too sexy? Then proceeds to talk in graphic detail about how he thinks his own daughter has been trying to seduce him for weeks and how he's starting to enjoy seeing her dance in these cute outfits. Meanwhile, my manager is looking through a computer system trying to figure out who this man is so she can call the cops. However, the room he was reportedly in was empty. The man ends up hanging the phone up before she could find out where he was truly calling from. A couple months later at around 11 p.m. my manager answers the desk phone. A familiar voice asked her if she could help him pick out an outfit for his daughter's next dance recital. She asked him, let me guess, you want to know if she should wear fishnet leggings? The man immediately hangs up the phone. I was an orderly in a hospital. 2 of us were sitting in the basement office adjacent to the morgue. A guy passed our office, looking at us a little shifty, came back again and asked if we had access to the morgue. We said yes, thinking he was doing a pickup for a funeral home, but that seemed strange given it was around 12 o'clock to 12:30 a.m. Turns out he wanted to pay us to let him in, and leave him alone with the bodies for an hour. We escorted him up to security. Apparently he had tried it in the past, as security knew him. Worked as an evening manager at a major Hilton property. Got a complaint from a bunch of guests about the noise coming from one of the rooms. Turns out, a drunken man was beating the shit out of his wife and had the door barricaded so we couldn't get in. I called the cops, and they had to get into the room using the balcony from the next room over. I'm still traumatized by what I saw when they finally arrested him and got the wife out of the room. She was covered in blood. It was horrifying. I'm a warehouse security guard in Indiana. I started on midnights and have since moved to seconds. It was around 4 a.m. and I was in the exterior part of my perimeter tour, and since no one was there I was singing a song, just something I like to do while I'm alone. So I'm outside. It's maybe a 100-foot walk to the door I'm supposed to re-enter the warehouse with. I hear footsteps and an awful voice singing the same song behind me. I whip around and this dude who's basically emaciated, his eyes are bulging, and he's got a bunch of pock marks on his face is walking behind me. I shit you not, my asshole was so tightly puckered I could have sucked in a bicycle. Some fucking meth or crack addict had snuck up on me and he was less than 15 feet away. I asked him who he was and why he was here. He didn't respond and just kinda watched me. I told him this is private property and is closed at this time. He needs to leave now or I'm calling the police. He looks around, scratches his arms a bit and turns and walks away, looking back occasionally. He finally left property, and when I was absolutely sure he was gone I bolted into the door. Scariest night I've had working there. If he hadn't started singing he could have done whatever he wanted to me. I have tinnitus and sometimes I hear noises that aren't actually there. When I hear footsteps nowadays I typically just chalk it up to I'm hearing a faint echo, because that's what it typically always is. Now whenever I hear anything I look to see what it was. I told my supervisor in the morning that I had to kick a person off property cause they were loitering after hours. Supervisor just kinda told me that stuff like that happens and it's fairly normal this close to the edge of inner Indiana. Not a night shift story, but I'm too lazy to find a proper thread to post this on, so I figured why not just post it here. Happened to me when I was about 9 or 10. My family and I had just gotten back from a camping trip with our grandparents. My grandpa had dementia and my grandmother would sometimes sleepwalk at very odd hours of the night. Anyway, I had just finished showering and doing my homework before getting into bed for the night. I get in bed and start to fall asleep shortly after. At about 2:30 a.m. I suddenly wake up and have this strong feeling that I'm being watched and that I'm not alone in my room. I slowly start scanning the room to see if I'm just being paranoid, but then I see it. I can see the dark silhouette of what looks like a small person standing halfway visible in my doorway. It's like they were hiding behind the doorway and staring at me. I screamed and turned on the lights as fast as possible. There was nothing there. I assumed that I was just seeing things and went back to bed. In the morning I wake up and ask my mom where grandpa and grandma are. She gives me a confused look and then says, "We haven't seen grandpa or grandma in months. What are you talking about?" I tell her about how they were with us at the camping trip and she starts to look very worried. She then calls my dad and asks me to explain it to him. He doesn't know what I am talking about either. I was so confused and didn't know what to believe because I was 100% sure that they were with us on the trip. About a week later my parents took me to a psychiatrist and I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Worked at a mall when I was 19 to 20 and would often work late even after the store closed, on displays and whatnot. Sometimes I wouldn't get out until midnight. I always tried to park near coworkers so that we could all walk out together, but I had arrived that day at a time that it was really busy and the only parking was way out in the back. There had been a guy in the store earlier that evening that was kind of creepy, just hanging around watching me and the other cashiers, and didn't buy anything. So that night as I was walking towards my car I hear footsteps behind me. I turn around and I realize it's him. He seemed like he was walking towards me, but I tried to reason that perhaps he was parked in the same area. I knew that I should probably pull out my phone and call someone, stay on the phone until I was safe in my car. But I sort of froze up, and before I could reach for my phone, he was behind me and grabbed me by the elbow, spun me around to face him. They always talk about fight or flight response, but leave out freeze, which is what happened to me. I just felt like a deer in headlights. It all happened so fast but felt slow at the same time. It's true what they say about how it feels like time slows down. He didn't say anything at first, but he was close enough that I could smell his clothes reeked of stale cigarette smoke, and his eyes were bloodshot. And he was kind of dead-eyed. I honestly almost pissed myself. All these thoughts came to mind. I'm gonna be raped, kidnapped, murdered. And then all of a sudden I hear someone's voice. A security guard who was doing rounds outside came around the corner. It was only like 10 seconds before he came, but like I said, it also felt like it took forever. He shouts something, I still can't recall what, and the dude takes off. Security guard comes over to me, asking if I'm okay, etc. I asked him if the next day it might be possible to find the creep on the store security tapes and put up some notice for security to not let him in or something. He hadn't actually done anything to me, so it's not like I could call the police. He stayed with me until my husband came to pick me up. I was still in shock for quite a while. I already had PTSD before this, so I totally shut down and couldn't absorb what happened. But what really scared me, I hadn't noticed this, but I heard the security guard tell my husband that the guy had like a pocket knife out. I just didn't see it. What was he gonna do with that? Not night shift exactly, but I get off work later than the average person and have a 2-hour bus/train ride home. You see some weird people at bus stops late at night. I could give a lot of random stories of weird, funny, or scary things that have happened. But this one stuck with me. This one still bothers me when I think about it. It was this dude talking to someone on the phone. He had a hood on so I couldn't actually see the phone, but I figured it was a phone since he was pausing for a response every so often. Generally people who are just rambling to nobody don't take those pauses. So he's ranting about how the Constitution is a universal law, and the amendments weren't hammered in enough to support it correctly, and how when you take vitamins you sweat toxins out of your feet after. He even paused during his explanation of how that worked and clarified something he'd mentioned. Normal level of crazy for a phone conversation, nothing too weird. But then he started saying something like, I'll write it out as best I can remember, just describing it wouldn't work. So, this is how I talk to myself. This is how I talk to myself, and I talk to myself all the time, because I have to. Because that's the only way to realize the truth. Everything they ever told you is a lie, and you've got to talk to yourself to stop being indoctrinated. You know, the teachers all said, be cool, stay in school. And they wouldn't lie to you. You think, your teacher wouldn't lie to you. But then you get addicted to drugs. Then you're a loser. Then you're not cool anymore. Then you're shooting up under a tree and it's the only little happiness you get, shooting up under a tree, and you go still high, that stuff still going through your veins to figure out your whole life philosophy. Then you're a loser, you're 32 and you lose your kids. He was starting to cry at that point. I guess he didn't have anyone on the phone with him after all. It was my stop then, and it's not a good idea to engage with obviously unstable drug addicts regardless, so I just got up and left. But that still bothers me. In my 20s, I used to deep clean a Burger King between 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. while it was closed. After my shift, I'd either head north and stop at Circle K on my way to another job or head west to an Exxon to grab a cup of coffee to help keep me up so I could regulate my schedule. One night, I finished my Burger King job early and headed to the Circle K to chit-chat with my friend Alice before my other job. As I was coming up to her gas station, I saw the parking lot roped off in yellow tape and several police cars in the lot. My heart sank as I headed to work. Later on that morning, I heard it on the news. It was awful. Alice had been murdered. She was shot in the back of her head. The murderer emptied the register and took the surveillance tapes that were recording at that time and left her in the back office. Police had no leads. After my shift that following night, I headed over to Exxon before going home. Bob asked me if I heard the news about the Circle K clerk. We were both in shock that something like that took place in our sleepy, southern town. We discussed how we deal with an intruder if our stores were attacked. It makes you take a step back and realize how quick it can all end. The Circle K was up and running a day after the murder. Things were starting to become complacent again in a short manner of time. For a couple of weeks, there were no leads. I'm sure I was recorded on earlier surveillance tapes, so I was waiting to get called, but never did. Even though I stopped going to Circle K, I'd still visit Bob at Exxon and we'd carry on as usual. About a month later, the news reported that they had found the murderer. They had a shot of 3 guys in handcuffs against the back of the police cruiser. One by one, they showed their faces. The first one looked familiar, but couldn't recognize him. The second one appeared and I couldn't place him either. That's when I saw the third guy. My jaw dropped. How could it be? And there he was on my TV screen. Bob. All this time had passed and I was alone with this guy discussing this murder for weeks, and the mother effer did it. Man, I was duped. Bob confessed to the police. It turns out that Bob and Alice had been dating when she called it off because he didn't give her space. On his days off, he'd sit in the Circle K parking lot watching her, and if he was working, one of his buddies did it for him. As I suspected, I wasn't the only one she'd have a smoke break with. There were other customers who enjoyed chatting with her. Bob lost it one night after one of these smoke breaks and killed her. His buddies were the watchouts. He got caught by showing off the recordings of the surveillance camera and telling people that he made a movie and how realistic the murder looked. In the end, they all had their day in court, the details revealed, and each of them went to prison. Bob was placed on death row and was eventually executed. Came home after a later shift, around 1 or 2 a.m., stopped at the 24-hour Walton shop on the way home. I lived in the sticks, and no one was on that road, normally. I see headlights behind me, coming up fast, but I was turning onto my gravel road anyway. Except, they turned as well. They were a good 1/4 mile behind me, but no one rolls there except the neighbors anyway, so I thought it was a little weird. Turn into my driveway, park and head into the house. I can hear their tires on the gravel, but they're slowing down. That's when my dog started barking and I felt a tingle. I ran inside and I could hear them turning into my driveway. I had a 12 gauge in my bedroom, so I ran and got it and went back outside. Since the driveway was pretty long, I had time. They were just stopping behind my car when I opened the door, stepping into the light on my porch. It was a white Ford F-150 pickup. I heard one door open, and then it closed right away. They reversed out of my driveway, spraying gravel everywhere. I don't know if it was a joke by some kids or what, but I don't think they thought about me being prepared to confront them. From then on, being in the sticks, far from police help, I kept that gun near the door, just in case. I was doing a night shift at a bodega in Brooklyn, and this homeless lady comes running and yelling and crying. She went to the beer section and broke the window with something. I went to go check it out, and she was hysterically crying, using a shard of glass to cut her wrist open. Not just clean cuts, but like gouging it open. Blood all over her shirt. No clue how she broke the window. There was a hospital literally a block and a half down, and the moment I saw her with blood streaming down her wrist, I just sort of manhandled her over my shoulder and ran to the hospital with her on me. She was crying and screaming and hitting me with her other arm. These guys who hang out on the block saw me run down the block with a tiny, screaming, bleeding woman over my shoulder, and they jolted after me thinking I was kidnapping her. They caught up to me and tackled me, and she fell to the ground, and they threw me against a wall and kept asking me what the fuck I was doing, and I said I was taking her to the hospital, and they all quickly realized what was going on and got her up into the hospital. The whole ordeal happened in like the span of maybe 150 to 200 seconds. I had a concussion from when they knocked me to the floor. She survived apparently, no clue besides that. This didn't become a horror story until recently, but as a teen, I used to close down the gas station/truck stop I worked at. My boss used to pop up out of the shadows as I was closing down the register with the backup lights on. He'd be super calm and act like it wasn't creepy. When it would be 11 p.m. and he should be home with his family. He was even at my high school graduation. He and his wife's numbers are still in my phone. Anyhow, he is currently on trial for murdering a prostitute via stabbing her to death, back in '94. Cold case potentially solved via DNA and modern science. Worked night shift at a large grocery store, one that wasn't open overnight but had a skeleton crew to work the loads and do prep and clean. I worked near the entrance, large glass doors but visually blocked off from my vantage point. Around 3 a.m., I hear knocking on the doors. This isn't completely uncalled for. Usually it's someone coming in for an early shift but didn't have a keycard. Sometimes it's someone's food delivery, or sometimes a customer who thinks we are open despite clearly being closed. I approach the door. It's a man that I don't recognize, wet from the rain. He looks normal enough, but something about him unnerved me. He had that vibe to him, you know, the one where it seems like maybe they're on their way to becoming a full-blown meth head, but for now they still manage to give the appearance of functionality. He was holding his shit together just enough to appear normal, but the edges were definitely shaky. Anyway, without unlocking the door, I announced that the store was closed. He told me that he just needed my help. His car had broken down in the parking lot and he needed a boost. I didn't drive, so I told him I couldn't help him. I should have walked away there, but he was out in the rain and I did legitimately feel bad, so I told him I would see if any one of our few crew did drive. I did find someone who was willing to help, and got the night crew manager involved as well. We went out. Turns out he was parked a bit off from the entrance, in a fairly secluded spot, and he had a lady with him. There was a similar vibe with her, almost normal but not quite. It didn't click right away, but I figured they had been hooking up in the car in the parking lot, maybe left the radio or lights on and drained the battery. To me, that explained the weird unnerving feeling. They either felt ashamed or guilty, and it was showing through. Anyway, my coworker goes over to help give him a boost. The manager and I stay out there with him, nearby, watching. The two lovebirds kept peeking over at us a bit uncomfortably. After a few moments, the coworker returns from the car and hurries us back inside. We don't see them drive off, which seems odd. We get inside, lock up again, and then the coworker thanks us for staying out there with him and not leaving him alone with them. He also caught on to the unnerving air about them, and it made him worried. What worried him more was when it also turned out that there was nothing wrong with their car. Oh man, I hate recalling this story. I work night shift at a rehab facility. We have a protected gate with a camera looking down from above and one of those doorbell cameras. In the office, the camera monitor is on one wall and the doorbell monitor is on another. I was doing some paperwork and see this guy walk past, stopped for a few seconds, then slowly turned around, walked back and stared up at the camera. And he kept staring. The facility is in a rough neighborhood, so I'm fairly used to folks hanging out around the gate and usually ignore it. But the way he was staring was off-putting. Like, his eyes and expression were hollow and dead, almost as if he were in deep thought about something horrible. I was pretty sure he was zonked on synthetics. I used the intercom to see if he was okay, but he just kept staring directly at the camera. We have a rule: if it's not hurt or trying to come through the fence, just let it be. No sense in engaging needlessly with somebody potentially hostile or fucking with the locals. Regardless, he stood there and stared at that camera for 2 hours. That same dead-eyed expression staring right at me. I did a round and came back to find him gone, which only creeped me out more. Many years ago, I worked at a regional radio station in the middle of nowhere, Australia. I was the overnight operator. My job included keeping the overnight playlist running, set up for the morning, do all the manual checks for the next day, and jump on the desk if anything funky happens. I spent a lot of time sitting in what was essentially a tin shed in the middle of a paddock, with my dog, shoes off, listening to 50s and 60s music and doing crossword puzzles. Except one night when the roo shooters came through. They spooked the kangaroos in the paddock, and one of them jumped headfirst through our office window. So there's me, barefoot and half asleep, when this 6-tall kangaroo smashes through the glass window. Blood and glass everywhere. My dog starts chasing the kangaroo, I'm chasing my dog. And the kangaroo bounds around the office, knocking shit off desks in the dark, bleeding everywhere. I ran and opened the studio bay doors, and my dog chased it outside. Where I'm assuming, the poor kangaroo was shot. Then I had to call my boss. I was once staying late doing some scenic painting in a college campus theater. It was late, pitch black dark outside and very quiet in the building. A few of us were up on the stage, not really talking, just taking care of business, when suddenly I saw out of the corner of my eye something go very quickly by the open door to the lobby. WTF? Then it went by again and I actually saw what it was. A guy with long hair, wearing pajamas, and no socks or shoes. He was tiptoeing in a very exaggerated way, pulling his knees up very high, and grinning. WTF? It sounds kind of funny, but it was creepy as hell. We all made eye contact and one of the other painters was just about to go shut the door when the dude walked right in. He stood there staring at us for a full minute. You could have heard a pin drop. He threw his arms out to the sides dramatically and said, "I am your savior, Jesus Christ." No one responded and he eventually walked out. I guess he was hoping to get more of a reaction. The door was promptly shut and locked behind him and security called. They were not impressed. Turns out that he was a patient at some sort of group home nearby and had done this multiple times. I still get creeped out to this day if I'm working in a theater at night though. I work with disabled people, youth and adults. In an adult unit, I was paired with another guy and we were looking at the cameras, waiting for the patient to wake up and go to the bathroom. That'd be around 4 to 5 a.m., right before day shift comes in. At some point, My colleague was dozing on and off, thanks to overtime, and I just saw the patient get up like they do sometimes in horror movies, rigid body movements, and just start to slap his face. Then, he ran to the door to slam his head into it. When we got to him, 15 seconds later, we saw what the evening shift guy meant when he said the patient wasn't well. His face was bruised and cut all over from him self-mutilating. He looked like a swollen statue of himself crying blood. If you guys like this video, please drop a like and subscribe, and also check out my Instagram account Scary Time that is linked in the description, and as always, stay scary.